It's your boy, Remoy George Phillip, the first.
And I'm Samantha Zessie Kifler.
This is MASKulinity.
The show that investigates the performance of masculinity in the world today, and you know we spell it with a hard K. Well, Remoy.
Yes, Samantha?
So we just got done with a break here in the U.S., and it was dope to bring back our Hearing the Warriors episode.
We got a break? You were in Bali. You were in a honeymoon. Yes, we got a break. But yeah, shout out to Keystone. Audience, if you want to go to Bali, have a lot of flight time, check out our last episode, an old one and a good one called Hearing the Warriors.
Yes, it was awesome. Both the episode and the trip. But indeed, it is always a good day to hear about how mixed gender leadership gets it done and to hear about resistance to systems.
And resistance to very institutional lies. All of it, especially right now.
Facts. We're heading to the holidays, so you know how to bring up your favorite topic of all time, Remoy.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is this is going to be my least favorite topic of all time.
Come on. You've been talking about unmasking masculinity for how long now? I'm sure you've had to make some time for self-care.
There it is, self-care. Sure. Uh-huh.
Of course I'm going to bring it up. It's been about a month since we learned that things are about to get a lot harder come January. So I just want to remind everyone that self-care is resistance when we're living in a system that profits from our burnout.
I don't know if it's self-care. I just call it therapy. Therapist Claire has been amazing the last few weeks, last few months, last few years. I understand that there's a lot of stigma or just, shame or hate around getting therapy. It's getting less and less, and let's hope it gets less and less more because I love it. I'm so grateful for it. I highly recommend it.
That's what's up. Shout out to therapy. I'm getting back on the horse myself this week. Cannot wait. It's been real. See, it's nice to hear you take a break from the literati stoicism to share yourself a little bit. Open yourself up to the people,
I'm also taking a break from therapy because of health insurance and my health insurance premium. So, that's not really touching conversation right now.
Yes, it is. If you know, you know. So I just figured we've got the holiday season approaching. It's good for people to take a moment, whether they're in the midst of loved ones or if you're spending the holidays alone.
Heavy on that. The holidays are a super lonely time for everyone, especially, but there's the men. It's a tough one for men.
Yep. And shout out to Justin Lioi for breaking that down for us last year.
Justin?
Yeah. I think sometimes it feels like we're one tough conversation away from restoring relationship, but that's hard to do if you've been conditioned to not communicate your emotions ever.
I feel like one of the conversations that will be coming up and perhaps has already come for people in this election, right? Like, how do you have the awkward Trump-supporting, MAGA-supporting fam conversations, firsthand, it's not easy, let me just say.
Facts on facts. And you know what? And that's why I am thankful that we were able to air out our grievances, right? And try to make sense of it with our presenting organization, Next Gen Men.
Yeah, and it wasn't just grievances. It was like to thoughtfully unpack what happened. And it was such a great space and thoughtful, considerate folks from the Next Gen Men community, general people came to discuss and hear masculinity in American politics and really ask some poignant questions about how we got here. And all around, it was dope. We had a great conversation.
You know what? It was. And not for nothing, but you did have some great points about what's been happening internationally in elections and how the U.S. may just be part of all of that.
Oh, okay. It's part of your, your self-care maybe? Is complimenting me?
Hi. Okay.
Ain't mad at it. You're?
Sure. Yeah. That one slipped out, but fine. You're welcome.
RGP1, what's up? So the good folks at Next Gen Men were kind enough to let us bring that conversation to our audience. So here it is for you today. We've got that whole conversation here in your feed.
Now, the conversation is sans Q&A to preserve the privacy of the participants, but we're grateful to Next Gen Men's community manager, Charlotte Kinloch, for being a great moderator and asking some good questions.
For sure. And that whole conversation is coming up right after the short break.
Curious about Next Gen Men? We're a small part of a much larger movement to undefine masculinity for a brighter future. Our mission is clear: empower the next generation to use their curiosity, empathy, and courage to build a more equitable world. Join the Next Gen Men community as we learn and unlearn together. We're here to support boys and men to break free from limiting stereotypes. We're not just an organization, we're a catalyst for reimagining masculinity and fostering inclusivity. We're here to help open up possibilities for what men and boys can be. Explore the world of Next Gen Men at nextgenmen.ca and join the community to make a difference. Next Gen Men, shaping tomorrow's leaders one step at a time. Join us and help undefine masculinity and empower the next generation of men to lead with empathy and courage.
So before we jump into our conversation, I would just like to start by sharing a land acknowledgement. Every day in Canada, we meet and work across the ancestral lands of many Indigenous peoples. I'm joining the call today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded land of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. Our hosts for today's event are Samantha Zessie Kifley and Remoy Philip. Samantha is located on the unceded land of the Ramaytush Ohlone, who are the original inhabitants of what is now the San Francisco Peninsula. The Greater Bay Area is also the ancestral territory of other Ohlone peoples and the Miwok, Yokits, and Putwin. Remoy is located on the dispossessed lands of the Lenape-Hoking, which means the land of the Lenape, an offspring of the Algonquin peoples. The Munsee Lenape people have been and still are connected to these lands, now known as New York. And I also want to just briefly touch on a couple of our community guidelines before we start. I actually was reading through them again and just refreshing my own knowledge of our guidelines, which I think is a good thing to do. So also recommend that everybody does that. But yeah, a few that I felt were particularly important to keep in mind during our conversation today was offering empathy first, and advice second, if advice is even warranted. Speaking from our own experiences, so trying to talk about, things leading with I statements and based on our own lived experiences and trying not to make assumptions about other people's, making space for diverse voices, and of course our favorite community guideline, which is speaking in draft, meaning we don't always have the perfect words or terminology to work through some ideas, especially these challenging and nuanced topics. So I just empower and encourage everyone to feel that they can speak in draft, and edit after the fact. We will leave 50 minutes at the end for Q&A. So feel free to take note of any questions as we go, or throw them in the chat and we'll make sure that we get to them later. Okay, so with all that said, I am super excited to welcome you all to this live edition of the Maskulinity podcast, and that is Maskulinity with a hard K, where we will be unpacking the recent US election. But first, it's my pleasure to introduce you to the amazing Maskulinity podcast hosts, Samantha and Remoy. Remoy Philip just really enjoys making curious, affecting work. Based out of New York City, Remoy works as an editorial journalist, producing media that has taken him around the globe, telling stories of underserved and marginalized people groups, resulting in humanization and audience activism. Samantha Zessie Kifley just wants everyone to get along equitably. A combination of French, Cameroonian, and Bay Area flavored American, Samantha sees a common denominator across cultures in outdated patriarchal norms dictating the way humans live. She has resolved to understand and expose this dynamic across various aspects of personal and social life. So welcome to Samantha and Remoy. And first of all, just thank you for spending your time and your resources and your energy here with us today. Like I said before, we know that some of these topics are tough and also require a lot of emotional labor. So I want to just like name that and express gratitude to you for taking the time to talk with us. So the election, yes, of course. So the election has sparked a lot of questions for all of us. Like, how could this happen? First and foremost, what does this mean? How will this impact politics in Canada? It's definitely a time of uncertainty, reflection, and for many, concern. But it's also a time for community. So that's why we're here today, not just to, dissect the results, but also to learn and unlearn together in a space of curiosity and care. Tonight, I'll be asking Samantha and Remoy a few questions just to really get into it. So, Samantha and Remoy, we wanted to host this event to unpack some of the ways gender, particularly masculinity, has played a role in this election. So let's just start with a super broad question. Do you think this was a gendered election? I mean, on the surface of things, it's kind of hard to say that it wasn't, but I would love to hear your takes. So whoever wants to jump in.
I'll just say, thank you everybody for being here. It's super fun and exciting to have such a handsome, beautiful audience with us. But you may be hearing some R&B playing right now. Literally, when the record button went off, my loud New York neighbors below me just turned on their speakers, which is incredible timing. So what that means is Samantha's going to do a lot of the labor of this conversation.
Oh, God. Okay.
I'll just sit back. Samantha, you go first.
Wow. All right. That was interesting. Good. Well, as far as a gendered election, I think it's an interesting question because on one level, yes, obviously, right? It's like a white dude who's a criminal going against this mixed, South Asian Black woman who is literally the most qualified person to run for president, maybe in history, but certainly in recent times. So the fact that there's even a comparison between the two for the highest office of the United States is a gendered question in itself, right? That's the bare bones piece of it. Now, when we talk to different Americans, right? We didn't talk to them. Pew Research Center talked to them, which I think we'll get to in a bit. There's this understanding that women have certain qualities that are really helpful in leadership. There's this understanding that even if you look at the data for women-owned and women-led companies, organizations, even in government, right? Around the world, we've seen a lot of women who are at the helm of their countries, and those are generally going well, right? They're going better than they were under male leadership. So the fact that we're comparing these two is definitely gendered, and, there were people who were looking past that and really taking a look at people's track records and seeing what would work better. So the short answer is yes. And the long answer is yes. And there are other things to consider, but it's still pretty much a yes.
Yeah, it is definitely wild. And I appreciate you just naming it so candidly as well there, the reality of the comparison between these two individuals who are running for one of the most powerful positions in the world, probably. And yeah, the fact that we're comparing a convicted criminal to somebody who is so qualified, and so kind of, well placed to be in that position is wild. So then building on that, or Remoy, is the music, did you want to add anything? Is the music too much of a distraction right now? I don't want to cut you off if you want to.
I can hear this bass like crazy. It's just bumping right under my feet. I don't know if anybody else can. But yeah, I'll just say, to just jump off what Samantha said, it's just a hair more. It's fascinating because it's just sad. And it's just really upsetting. And the reason is, the outcome of the election is explicitly, it's because a lot of people are just going to suffer because of this. And universally speaking, trans individuals are going to lose rights and healthcare and lose just access to respect in the general public sphere. Queer individuals Joe the plumber is going to lose, is going to be hurt by what the tax situation is going to come out to be. Obviously, reproductive rights are going to be a challenge. Everybody's going to lose universally. And how gender was utilized in this election, there's the obvious, which Samantha pointed to initially. But I think there's a lot of complex issues around how, like Samantha said, gender overlapped with a lot of other variables in this, whether on the surface, explicitly or either implicitly. It kind of feels a little tricky, gross, maybe to try to, like, as Americans would say, like, Monday morning quarterback that, right? Like American football. But I think the point of it is, like you said, Charlotte, to like utilize some of this stuff to help think about how we can shape the unlearning around it moving forward and what our roles and responsibilities are moving forward. So that's what I'll add. Bass is still pumping down below me. So,
well, we can't hear anything. Yeah, it's fine.
Shout out to Zoom.
Yeah, good job, Zoom. Yeah, and I think, like, I don't know, just naming all those people and all those groups who are going to be so negatively affected, it also makes me think, like, is anybody winning here apart from, like, maybe just wealthy white?
Elon is winning.
Yeah, people who already have that level of power.
Jeff Bezos is winning.
Yeah.
But that's it.
Then building on that, and you kind of touched on it, but yeah, part of what we're exploring in today's conversation is that connection between what you both uncovered in your recent episode of Masculinity with Pew Research on their study about how Americans perceive men and masculinity and how those perceptions might be or might not be reflected in the election results. So could you just share a little about what you heard from Juliana at Pew and maybe like what surprised you? Because I was definitely surprised when listening to that episode.
One thing that stood out, there were a lot of questions that they pose about how men and about how Americans feel about men and masculinity, right? And masculine traits specifically. So the main thing that was really a highlight for us was that in general, Americans feel that the qualities of being caring, open about your emotions, and they also said like soft-spoken, which, you know, whatever. But that those things were things that were not valued enough in men. And there were also a lot of people who felt that the qualities of being daring, risk-taking, and all of those things kind of associated with what we think of as traditional masculinity were too valued in men. And the interesting thing was that most people who said that those traits, the risk-taking traits, are not valued enough, that confidence and all of that, were more of the conservative side of Americans, along with older generations of Americans. So I think definitely that the caring piece definitely surprised me, that people really feel across the aisle, right? This was like a bipartisan feeling in the U.S. that, you know, guys being caring is not valued enough. That was really surprising. The other thing that was really, really surprising to me was that in general, Americans feel that women have had more progress than men have, which is statistically factual, but they don't blame men's lack of progress on women's progress. That was surprising because, you know, as a masculinity podcast, I consume a lot of podcasts that are about healthy masculinities, but I also try to see what's going on sort of on the other side. So I, don't consume a lot of manosphere stuff, but I come across a lot of it during my research. That's definitely a huge plot point, that essentially the progress that would have gone to men has somehow been taken away from, that would have gone to men has now been usurped essentially by women, right? So it was surprising to me to find out that most American men do not actually feel that way, because I definitely thought they would.
Yeah, It's really interesting because I also was very surprised by that. And then I'm like, I don't know if it's just because of like the spaces that we exist in and like the work that we do, when we're always kind of hearing these narratives of like and like blaming women for their problems and all this growth of the manosphere and like, yeah, certain individuals out there who are kind of peddling these narratives. So yeah, to find out that wasn't actually the views of the majority of men was super surprising. And it also makes me think, like, I wonder what or who, or not blaming, but like, why do they feel like they haven't made the same progress then? And like, where, like, who are they blaming feels like the wrong word.
Well, so Pew actually has some information on that. There was a study that they did, I think it was around like the 2018s, maybe. Don't quote me on that. But essentially, they were trying to examine why men were falling behind in school and why they hadn't made as many strides when it comes, in general, across kind of like the educational kind of hierarchy, I guess, basically from like primary school onto secondary education. And they found that there were different reasons for that, right? Like, I expected it to be around, it's expensive. People don't have the resources, the time to actually go to school. But really what it was that there's a lot of men out there who feel like they can make it in some other way. So like conversations around like becoming, it sounds wild that so many people think this way because of the work that it requires, but a lot of people think that they can, become an athlete or become an influencer, kind of like that trajectory of kind of using fame or super skill to ascend. And then some people just weren't interested. They were like maybe trade schools or like more kind of, vocational training was better. And then there was a small subset of people who felt like school wasn't really for them. What it did not measure, which I'm really curious about, is, a lot of like the performance of masculinity, right, is that, being studious is not necessarily considered to be like a very masculine trait. It's all about using your hands, using all these things. So my guess is that there's a little bit of that in there as well. But, Pew is very kind of straight into the, to the point. They have to remain extremely impartial. So there has been, like men are behind. That's a fact, right? Like in school, they're behind. Professionally, they're behind. Professionally, they're behind because it's not across all ages. Like it's younger generations and it's older generations, because what's happening in older generations is that a lot of the industries that previously existed for men, like coal, auto plants, these things like that have faded out for a number of reasons, as I'm sure a lot of us here know. And a lot of older men are not willing to take on kind of professions that are stereotypically feminine. So that's your teachers, which there's always a huge demand of. That's your nurses, which there's always a huge demand of, but they're not, or demand for, but they're not willing to do that. So, so men have fallen behind, and women, of course, are able to kind of transcend all these different things before that they're, or ascend into all these different things before that they weren't able to. So I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I think it's somewhat in the direction. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, there's definitely a lot of factors at play. And actually that idea of like, men's jobs that were traditionally viewed as being more masculine or being more appropriate for men are kind of like dying out with the rise of technology and all of that. And there are jobs out there, like you said, in nursing, teaching, more like care-oriented stuff that men don't have the kind of societal permission, I suppose, to like take on as their own. And it's definitely complicated.
There's an interesting statistic that I saw recently, like faith in the education system, collegiately speaking, has dropped dramatically across parties. I think it's like at this point, only like in mid 2010s, 2015, I believe, like it was like 36% of Republicans believed in the academic collegiate system, higher education. Now I think 2024, it's 20%, but that's universal. Democratic Party, similarly, it was like in almost 70%. Now it's in the low 50%. It's like there's been the faith in the academic system, in the collegiate system, and how it bears out is one thing that I find very interesting. And that kind of bears into like this previous episode we did about assessing the outcome of the election, and looking at education and those correlations there. But similarly, or another thing that I think that is just, it's unfortunate to have to like say it this way, and to think about it so simplistically or hyper reductively in the sense that, this is an anti-incumbent outcome, and it's kind of happened universally across the world. Like incumbents lost everywhere, even in highly right-wing societies like in India. Modi and like the BJP lost a lot of votes in parliament, or a lot of seats in parliament. And what Trump was able to do was to use like this populist ideals and be a populist evil genius in his rhetoric to kind of make himself the person for the people. So if the people are seeing education as the establishment, they're seeing college educated white collar jobs be the establishment, it's really easy to say by him and his party, look, the bad guys over there, they taking all your money, they got all the jobs, they're the establishment. I'm for you, I'm with you.
Yeah. And to piggyback on what Remoy is saying, and to then introduce different forms of accessing education and accessing information, which I think that's where kind of things like the manosphere and everything come in. But anyway.
Yeah, no. And I'm glad that you kind of began to touch on like some of Trump's rhetoric there, because it feeds nicely into my next question. So like you said, Pew Research found that people generally seem to believe that we underestimate the value of men having qualities like being emotional, caring, affectionate, basically traits that have historically and traditionally seen as being more feminine. And Trump's communication strategy heavily relies on these appeals to restore some sense of past national greatness, which, we could also talk about great for who exactly. But yes, these narratives often kind of seem to align with like traditional rugged ideals of masculinity, yet if Americans generally don't feel that traditional masculinity is under attack, and instead that we undervalue traits in men like being caring or emotional, then why has Trump's appeal to some past like greatness resonated so strongly? Or like, is it just nothing to do with masculinity at all? Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Honestly, the short answer is white supremacy. Because regardless of whatever traits you feel might be better for leadership, whatever traits you feel are not championed enough in men, the package that it comes in is still extremely important to Americans. I mean, at the end of the day, like Trump ran 3 times and the only time that he lost was against another white man. And he has never been qualified to be president. So I think there is like, it's like Juliana said actually in the episode. She said that even if people don't attribute women's success and progress, or don't blame men's lack of progress on women's progress, it doesn't mean that they like it, right? It doesn't mean that they approve of that. It doesn't mean that they think it's a good thing. They can acknowledge that, but that doesn't mean that they're then going to go and vote according to what the logical facts are. Like people will vote for emotion, like because of emotion. People will vote for the things that they feel like they've lost and the things that they feel can be recaptured by this man. And so I think one of the things, with white supremacy specifically is like, we saw how a lot of people who are, obviously Trump is mainly in office because a lot of white people voted for him, right? Like consistently, that seems to be the case across gender lines. But he, with the exception of like older white guys, which is very, very surprising to me, which we could talk about a little bit later. But Trump has gained popularity. He had more votes in every single demographic across ages than he did in the past 2 elections. So he's gaining traction across the board. And I think that has to do with who people feel comfortable with as a leader, the fact that we've seen how women leaders and like having qualities of empathy, qualities of kind of like leading from the back, so to speak, like the fact that there has been more effective leadership does not mean that people's egos aren't at stake with this election, right? The fact that like men are falling behind, this is almost like a grasp at the last opportunity for masculinity to continue to rule the day. And also seeing somebody obviously who was able to like get away with a lot of things. I think people do identify with that in a lot of ways and think that that's something that can work, against our enemies around the world, right? Like that you need that force, you need that guy in order for America to stay on top, so to speak.
I don't know if I'll disagree with that, but I just want to add some more nuance to that. It's like a fun little political way to say what you want to say, right? No, I want, like Trevor said it in that, so we had Trevor on in the Pew episode. And I think it's a statement that we all think about and say about in these spaces, like men are hurting. And what Trump was able to do is to speak to that pain, maybe not directly, but he's able to address that pain in a really interesting way and make individuals, especially men, Black, Latino, white, across the board, like Samantha said, made their pain feel hurt. Now, does he address it with an actual solution? No, but he did do that and he did it very successfully. And that's the genius of his populism. Contrarily, like you can make the claim, and I've seen these criticisms bouncing around, and is it fair? Is it right? Is it necessary? I don't know, but did the Democratic Party, did Kamala, did the pundits on that side speak to men's individual pain like that? That's an interesting to consider. How Trump was able to do that and the Democratic Party didn't. And whether Kamala played the identity politics games or not, I don't know if that's worth talking about. But this inability to see that true reality about men's pain as a broad stroke versus like small groups like us focusing on it, but being able to speak to that pain in a way, I think Trump was very successful at, and the Democratic Party kind of fell dramatically short.
And that's also kind of like reflected in other spaces as well. Like some of these, anti-feminist influencers who I will not say their name, but, are also like part of the reason why they gain so much traction and such a large following is because in some way they're also making men feel seen and heard and like tapping into those feelings of like isolation or a lack of belonging, a lack of community, like, this uncertainty around what it means to be a man now and all of these things. They have an ability to kind of tap into that. And that's clearly a massive thing that men are struggling with. Otherwise, I guess it wouldn't be gaining so much traction. But I mean, like through all of this, I am noticing a theme, and there seems to be a tension between the kind of growing recognition and acceptance of more like vulnerable and caring forms of masculinity and the appeal of a hyper-masculine leader like Trump. And I'm curious if either of you have thoughts on what that kind of tension says about how ideas around masculinity are evolving in American society. Like, is there maybe a general, and I guess we've kind of touched on this, but yeah, it just feels like there's a general acceptance that traits traditionally seen as being more feminine are actually valuable for men. Like, but maybe like not so valuable that we deem them worthy traits for leadership. Like, yeah, empathy is great, but like, not if you want to be a leader. And yeah, caring about other people is great, but not if you want to be a leader. Like, that kind of is a feeling I'm getting, but does that resonate? Do you want to go first this time? Go on, Remoy.
Yeah, I think it's kind of what we've been saying in the sense, like, I think for me, just personally, like I'm originally from Texas in a very conservative place, grew up very conservative, very religious, traditional, like Judeo-Christianity kind of Americana kind of was like in my core being for a good chunk of my life. But now living in New York, definitely converted to a new environment. I'm hyper liberal in this like really absurd liberal bubble. So I'm out of touch with a lot of things. And I think for me specifically, like, and personally, it's like, wow, I was just so naive about how I misunderstood how deeply, fundamentally entrenched masculinity is in our construction of the American society. Like, just thinking that the fact that our forefathers, like obviously that's like duh, but like just to think about that, like how masculinized or gendered like the construction of our American identity as a society is. And then if you add on the religious aspect of it, of like this male God figure endowing or anointing these male figures or leaders, it sounds too simplistic, but it is so deeply entrenched that we take for granted that Americans, broadly speaking, and have been indoctrinated in that in one way, shape, or form. A lot of, again, liberal pundits are making the like playing the blame game. Should have Biden not rerun and got out sooner? Would have that given Kamala more time to like build her message and build her identity and association to the voting public? Maybe, but it's hard. Like it's so deeply entrenched. So now it's like up to us, especially when it comes to like the show that we're doing, to like think about how do we surface these ideas of that deep entrenchment, where it came from, and how do we challenge that? Mm. And so like we can see this progressive push and this cultural push that the Pew results kind of bore out, but it still doesn't counteract, again, that so like molecular entrenchment of these ideas of gender leadership, gender and presidency, gender and our supreme hyper-masculine leader. I'm done. Your turn, Samantha. Go.
I think that what you said is so spot on. And I think that one thing that we really can't ignore is that in terms of kind of that male kind of leader, that's like the kind of messiah or whatever you want to think about it as, like that's being funded by conservatives. Like that messaging is being funded by conservatives in sort of in the main media. I mean, kind of cable news tends to be more liberal, right? Like the local news is sort of less like partial, whatever, but people like conservatives are not really getting their news from cable news like that. I mean, there's Fox News, but besides that, they're really getting their news from podcasts. They're getting their news from social media. They're getting their news from Facebook. Like they're getting their news. I think what was it? The stat was like, I think it was like 40% of Americans are getting their news from like YouTube and Facebook or something like that. It was either 40% or it was a third. Either way, it was like a really large chunk. So, you know, even if there's like spaces like Next Gen Men, right? Spaces that are kind of around the country, around the globe, creating spaces, like actually having this conversation of healthy masculinities, you need money to have that message be out there. You need money for people to participate. And like what happened with this election, there's been a lot of talk about it, right? And I think like Remoy alluded to a little bit is that, yeah, like Trump going in these different like podcasts, or maybe it was you, Charlotte, where Trump is going on these different podcasts, these different platforms. He's like saying no to this. I mean, maybe it was with you, saying no to the establishment of like established education, kind of colluding with these different types of podcasters that have millions of dollars behind them to push this message. And then saying like, this is kind of the information of the people, right? This is the information of the people. Who you are as a person and as a man is currently under attack. Whether or not most people feel like that is irrelevant because they have the bigger platform peddling that message out. And we're sort of like scrappy, trying to like make it happen for healthy masculinities in these like different centers and stuff. They have a center stage making that happen. So, I mean, that's one thing I think as far as like the criticism for the, you know, for the liberals and the Democrats and stuff for the election that I definitely could stand behind. Like you could have gone on a podcast, like there's a really great podcast called Gaslit Nation that talks about the downfall of democracy. That would have been the time for you to put a cool $5 million behind them so that that information could get out there. That did not happen. The misinformation and disinformation that's been peddled out there has a lot of money behind it. Yeah. And I think we can't really ignore that it's not just the will of the people. It's also like a collective, very intentional manipulation.
Yeah, that also made me think like the statistic around, you said 40% of Americans get their news from YouTube. Like, I mean, I don't spend a lot of time on YouTube, like never really have, but I also know that the like chats in the side of YouTube are like some of the worst places on the internet. And like, who spends a lot of time online. I feel like boys and men. And then there just seems to be something in that if we're like going to YouTube for our information, and then like there's these communities that can be quite harmful, and then these narratives which are often like political and quite often quite hateful, I think, in the like live chat on the side. Like, I don't know, that just seems to mix into quite a ball of dangerous thinking and ideologies. So,
but the other thing that these spaces, these manosphere spaces are doing, which is Trevor's point that he made on the episode, which is an excellent point, is that it's providing community for men. Mm-hmm. And it's providing community for men in a way where they don't have to go to that sort of super caring, vulnerable place, which makes them deeply uncomfortable, but still be able to get that community, right? And so that's the thing I think that it's a tough thing, because it's like we get men are hurting. They want to have connections with each other. They're having less and less friends. I think we did an episode about like male friendship kind of has been dwindling. And the older you get, right? So they need that community. And so whether it's a community of hate or a community of love, whether it's a community of pointing the fingers or a community of like belonging, well, actually, belonging and hate don't have to be, that's not mutually exclusive, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's still effective.
Yeah, it is definitely like, it's a tricky one, because it's like, is it better for them to at least have community and have some belonging, even if there's like some, hatefulness and some harm wrapped up in that? Or is it better for people to just be isolated and on their own? And maybe that also can lead to its own damaging outcomes, like for that person and for people around them. So
just a quick thing, there needs to be algorithmic governance. So like there has to be, the state institutions have to like put in protocol and it doesn't have to be explicit censorship. I know the conversations around censorship, I get into these conversations, and I don't think it has to be that. But if we look at the model of tobacco industries in America and syntaxes and other informational campaigns that grew out of a space where it was so normalized to what it is now, there has to be that kind of approach to algorithmic governance. Because we understand we're not even just at the beginning. We know that the outcomes for this, the issues that are connected directly to this type of modeling of the communication of information that feeds into the worst parts of our individual selves and our societal selves, needs to be curtailed or cut, full stop. Now, with the sense that who our new leader of our country, it's not in his best interest, and his the complete overhaul or the right-wing reign of our governmental system, which is terrifying. It's probably not going to happen, obviously, but if we're going to look at something, I don't know. I just lost all hope. Anyways, I'm done.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. We're it's contagious. We're all there. Okay, so we have kind of touched on this point a little about how Pew's report also found that while people generally don't believe that gains for women have come at men's expense, they do think that changing gender roles have benefited women more than men. And in like our work at Next Gen Men, we often discuss how developing traits like emotional literacy, so the ability to talk about your emotions, empathy, care. We talk about how these things lead to positive outcomes, right? Like healthier relationships, better mental health. So why do you think there's this perception that these changing gender roles might not be benefiting men, if it's like giving them permission to kind of step into these other ways of being and these other traits? And how do you think that perception might have influenced the outcome of the election? Big question. So
it is a big question.
Go on, Remoy.
This may not be the answer the answer to the question that you asked, but I think it's unfortunately simplistic in the sense of the outcome of the election and how, again, it went to anti-incumbent, in the sense that universally across the globe, but especially in America, people were, myself included, Samantha included, are having financial struggles. And so that big, giant pain point in our wallets and purses and coin bags had such an overcompensating or powerful effect along with a widespread other affairs, or how Trump and the MAGA party was able to like leverage that to their gains. So unfortunately, because we live in such a severely hyper-capitalistic society, no matter the pros of the pros of financial security versus the pros of like emotional health, unfortunately aren't one-to-one at this space right now. And or at least they can be leveraged, they can be utilized to leverage the situations that don't work in equal balance, if that makes sense. And that financial insecurity is very right.
Yeah. I mean, the economy was like named as, like key issue that were influencing people's decisions, which also relatable. I think it was in your latest episode you released, one of you was saying like it costs $50 to step outside, and like that is freaking true. That is a fact. I do also still come back to this like, there's this perception that Trump as like a successful businessman would be better for the economy, and how that kind of overshadows Kamala's like extensive qualifications. So
it's not true.
Yeah.
It's not true. So one thing I will say about the economy that does play in Trump's favor. Obviously we talked in the episode about, well, maybe not obviously, but we talked in the episode about like inflation being a global phenomenon. Remoy just mentioned it. Like how COVID impacted everybody's economies worldwide. The US was not immune to that, obviously. They had to do a big bounce back game. Now, during Trump's first presidency, the stock market did perform better than it did under Biden, right? And so I think that when you think about these things, you take a look at who he's naming for his cabinet, you think about a lot of the people that he had, give him money for and like championing him for this campaign, a lot of them have a lot of stake. A lot of them have a lot of their wealth tied up in the stock market, right? So, and you've noticed since he's been elected, the stock market has started to swell with a lot of like it's rising. A lot of stocks are doing well. Like Tesla went through the roof. I think Elon Musk made like $64 billion in like 2 days, something ridiculous. So, there's this notion, it's like a weird thing because in some ways it kind of goes back to like Reaganomics in a way where like people think that because these like billionaires or whatever whose personalities they like are making more money, somehow that power, that money, all of that is going to trickle down to them somehow. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that people, myself included, I'm not an economist. I switched my major in college. I was going to be an SDOT. So but I think people have, including economists themselves, like all they can do is predict. They can look at trends. They can be experts, right? But the economy is going to do what the economy does because it is a beast of its own, right? You can really just kind of anticipate and try to figure out what's going to happen and try to position yourself in the best way possible. But at the end of the day, people wanted to see something different because the cost of living is high, because groceries cost way too much, a lot of which has to do with inflation. That's not something that an actual president can really do anything about. A lot of that stuff has actually had to do with like the Fed and all these different things. But at the end of the day, people were upset. And so they went for that. And Donald Trump has done something for the economy that will be helpful. It just will not be helpful for the majority of the population.
And like it goes back to his incredible populist rhetoric. Like, if he says like, yo, you get tips, you're not going to get taxed. You get overtime, we're going to take those taxes away. We're going to set tariffs up so that'll make it more incentivized to bring jobs back here. He says these things, he's speaking to the people that are hurting the most. But will those outcomes bear out? No. But he's able to speak to that. While Kamala and the Democratic Party are not, and then pointing to maybe potential corruption when it comes to special interest groups and the PACs that are surrounding the Democratic Party and the corporations that Democrats have been wishy-washy about taxing and or going after. The populist wins, man.
Yeah. And it's like that base level of needs, isn't it? Like you said, Remoy, you can't, literally though, you can't like be thinking about your ability to like communicate your emotions if you're worrying about being able
Can
to feed
I
yourself. Yeah, literally. Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of women actually voted for Trump because they were like, my husband will be able to get a job if he's president. I don't think that will happen under Kamala. So there's also that.
You know, listening back to myself sometimes, I just think of all the things that I'm missing.
Bro, I don't know what you're talking about. I feel like your boy hit it pretty spot on, but you did too. Come on.
Aw. I mean, all right. You know, I mean, to be fair, I don't call you literati for no reason, Remoy.
Touche, I guess.
Well, audience, this is your chance to get your girl together. Was there anything I missed in response to Charlotte's questions?
Nope.
Let us know. Oh, thank you.
Yeah, we want to make sure that you have the space to talk about masculinity, how it's impacting your lives, the election, or whatever otherwise. We're here, all ears. Pun intended.
Nice. And you know where to do that. Hit us up at masculinitypod.com, always with that hard K, where you'll find a comment box for your writing pleasure. And of course, our DMs are always open. For any and all comments, questions, grievances, thoughts, we're at Masculinity Pod on all social platforms.
Writing pleasure? All right, Mrs. Literati. Tiflay.
That one's for you.
What up, Adam? Absolutely. Of course, if you liked what you heard, make sure to leave us 5 stars, wherever you get your podcasts,
right.
so this conversation can reach more ears. Honestly, there's never been a better time.
That is facts. And so we'll see you here in 2 weeks for our next episode. Rest assured, this was our last one on the election.
Is it? Okay. Until then, it's your boy, Remoy George Philip, the first.
And I'm Samantha Zessi Kifle. Thank you so much for listening.
Peace.
Ciao.